"You are lying, your majesty." The words fell into the grand hall like a single drop of rain in complete silence. No one moved. No one breathed too loudly. Every person inside the royal chamber knew one rule above all others. No one questioned the Alpha King. The towering throne at the end of the hall belonged to Adrian Whitmore, the most powerful ruler in the Leaking Kingdom. His decisions shaped the future of thousands. His voice carried the weight of generations. And yet, standing among the nobles and royal advisors was a young Omega woman who had just looked directly at him and called him a liar. Emily Hayes did not realize the full meaning of what she had done. She was not trying to challenge a king. She was not seeking attention. She simply believed that something was wrong, and her heart would not allow her to stay silent. Emily had spent her entire life in a small border village where Omegas were often told to be quiet, to accept their place, and to avoid standing too close to those with power. She understood how the world saw her. Person with little influence. A voice that most people ignored. But Emily had always believed that kindness meant nothing if it disappeared the moment speaking the truth became difficult. That belief was the reason she stood in the royal hall that day. The annual gathering of the Leakin territories was supposed to be a peaceful celebration. Leaders from across the kingdom had arrived to discuss plans for the coming year. Everyone expected the Alpha King to announce a decision that would bring prosperity to the northern villages. But when Adrian spoke, Emily noticed something that others overlooked. The information he had received was incomplete. The reports did not show the struggles of the smaller communities. They only showed numbers written by people far away from the lives affected by those decisions. Before she could stop herself, Emily stepped forward. "Your Majesty, that cannot be the whole truth." The entire room turned toward her. The nobles looked shocked. Some whispered that an Omega had forgotten her place. But Emily continued. "The reports say the villages are doing well, but I have seen those villages. The people are working harder than ever, and they still do not have enough support. If this decision is based on those reports, then someone has not told you everything." Adrian stared at her from the throne. For years, people had approached him carefully. They chose every word because they feared making a mistake. But this woman was different. She was nervous. He could see it in the way she held her hands. Yet she did not step back. She was not trying to impress him. She was trying to protect people who had no voice in the room. "You are calling my information false?" Adrian asked calmly. Emily lowered her head slightly, showing respect but not surrender. "I am saying the information you received is incomplete, Your Majesty." The room remained silent. Everyone waited for the Alpha King's reaction. But Adrian did not see disrespect in her words. He saw something he had not encountered in years. Honesty without expectation. Courage without ambition. As he looked at the Omega standing before him, one thought crossed his mind. Everyone in this kingdom feared telling him the truth. But this woman was brave enough to do it. And for the first time in a long time, Adrian Whitmore was interested in someone who did not fear his crown. The silence inside the royal hall lasted longer than anyone expected. Every noble waited for the Alpha King to respond, expecting anger, disappointment, or a reminder of the distance between a ruler and an Omega from a small village. But Adrian Whitmore did something no one predicted. He asked a question. "Why are you so certain the reports are incomplete?" His voice was calm, but his eyes remained focused on Emily Hayes. The young Omega took a slow breath. She had expected rejection. She had expected people to dismiss her words before hearing them. Yet the Alpha King was giving her a chance to explain. "Because I have seen the villages mentioned in those reports," Emily answered. "The numbers describe supplies and production, but they do not describe the people. They do not show the families who are struggling every day, or the workers who are trying to keep their communities strong." Adrian listened carefully. For years he had surrounded himself with advisors who studied information, prepared strategies, and delivered carefully chosen words. But Emily offered something different. She spoke from experience. She had walked through those villages. She had spoken with those people. She understood the reality behind the numbers. The council members exchanged uncertain looks. They were not used to an Omega challenging a royal decision, especially in front of the entire kingdom's leaders. Some believed Emily was being reckless. Others wondered why Adrian continued listening. But the Alpha King noticed something important. Emily was not trying to gain influence. She was not asking for a position or reward. She had stepped forward because she believed someone needed to speak. "You understand that your words could have consequences?" Adrian asked. Emily looked at him. For a brief moment, the confidence she had shown began to fade. She knew the risk. She knew many people already believed in Omega should remain silent. But she also knew that ignoring the truth would hurt the very people she wanted to protect. "Yes, Your Majesty," she replied softly. "But I would rather be wrong while trying to help than remain quiet when I know something is being overlooked." Those words stayed in the air. Adrian had heard countless speeches throughout his reign. Many were designed to impress him. Many were carefully planned to gain his approval. But Emily's words were simple. They carried no hidden request. They only carried sincerity. After the meeting ended, Emily expected to leave the palace immediately. She believed she had already created enough trouble. She quietly prepared to return to her village, hoping that the Alpha King would forget the unusual encounter. But Adrian had a different plan. Instead of dismissing her, he requested the original village records and asked his advisors to review the information again. The results surprised everyone. Some details had been missed. Some concerns from smaller communities had never reached the royal chambers. Adrian realized Emily had not accused him out of disrespect. She had reminded him of something every leader needed to remember. A crown could provide authority, but it could never replace understanding. Later that evening, Adrian walked through the palace gardens, thinking about the Omega who had spoken to him differently from everyone else. He had spent years searching for people who would tell him the truth. Yet the person who finally did was someone the world had taught him to overlook. Meanwhile, Emily returned to her village believing the moment was over. She thought she would become a forgotten memory in the Alpha King's long list of meetings. She did not know that Adrian Whitmore had already made a decision. He wanted to know more about the Omega who had challenged his crown without ever trying to take it. The days after the royal gathering felt different for both Emily Hayes and Adrian Whitmore. Emily returned to her small village, expecting life to continue exactly as it had before. She went back to helping her neighbors, preparing supplies, and caring for the people around her. To everyone else, she was still the same Omega who had always lived quietly beyond the center of the kingdom. But Emily felt something had changed. For the first time, she wondered if her voice truly mattered. She had spent years believing that important decisions belonged only to those with power. Yet, in the royal hall, she had spoken honestly and someone had actually listened. What Emily did not know was that the Alpha King had not forgotten their conversation. Adrian continued reviewing the information from the northern villages, and each new detail confirmed what Emily had said. The reports had not been completely false, but they had only shown one side of the truth. They described resources and numbers, but they did not describe the lives behind them. Adrian found himself thinking about Emily's words more often than he expected. "A leader cannot understand a kingdom by only reading reports," she had said. The sentence stayed with him because it revealed something he had slowly begun to recognize. He had spent years protecting the kingdom, but perhaps he had not spent enough time truly listening to it. Curious about the Omega who had challenged him, Adrian decided to visit the northern village himself. He did not arrive with a grand ceremony or a large group of officials. He wanted to see the place through his own eyes. When Emily discovered the Alpha King had arrived, she was completely surprised. She had expected him to send advisors, not appear personally. "Your Majesty, I did not think you would come here," she said. Adrian looked around the village, noticing the simple homes, the hard-working families, and the quiet determination of the people. "Neither did I," he admitted. "But someone reminded me that seeing is different from hearing." Emily did not know how to respond. She had never imagined that her words could influence someone like him. As Adrian walked through the village, he noticed something else. People trusted Emily. Children greeted her warmly. Older villagers asked for her advice. Neighbors respected her because she had always been there when they needed support. She had no official title. She had no position in the royal court. Yet she had earned something many powerful people spent their entire lives trying to gain: genuine respect. Adrian watched her help a family organize their winter supplies, and realized that her strength had nothing to do with status. It came from the way she treated others when no one was watching. Later that evening, Adrian and Emily spoke near the edge of the village. The sky was clear, and the quiet landscape felt far away from the pressure of the palace. "Why did you really speak that day?" Adrian asked. Emily looked at him with confusion. "I already told you. You told me what you believed," Adrian said. "But why were you willing to risk everything to say it?" Emily thought for a moment. "Because someone had to." Her answer was simple. But to Adrian it meant everything. The Alpha King had spent years surrounded by people who wanted his approval. Yet this Omega had only wanted the truth to be heard. And that was the reason he could not stop thinking about her. Because Emily Hayes was the first person in years who treated him not as a king, but as a person who needed to be reminded of what truly mattered. The visit to the northern village changed something between Emily Hayes and Adrian Whitmore that neither of them expected. When the Alpha King returned to his palace, he carried more than new information about the kingdom. He carried memories of a place where people did not measure worth by titles or power. He remembered the way Emily spoke to everyone with the same respect, whether they were villagers or royal guests. For the first time in many years, Adrian found himself thinking less about how others viewed him and more about how he could better serve them. Meanwhile, Emily returned to her normal routine, believing the Alpha King's visit had simply been a moment in time. She never imagined that her honesty had left such a strong impression. She continued helping her village prepare for the changing season, unaware that people far beyond her home had begun hearing about the Omega who reminded their ruler to listen. Stories traveled quickly through the kingdom. Some admired Emily's courage. Others questioned why an Omega with no noble background had gained the attention of the Alpha King. Inside the royal court, opinions were divided. The traditional advisors believed the distance between the crown and ordinary citizens existed for a reason. They feared that Adrian's growing interest in Emily would change the balance they had protected for generations. But Adrian saw things differently. He did not see Emily as a challenge to his authority. He saw her as a reminder of the purpose behind it. One morning, Adrian invited Emily back to the palace. The message surprised her. She wondered why the Alpha King would want to speak with her again. She arrived expecting another formal conversation, but Adrian welcomed her with a simple request. He wanted her opinion on the village reports before making future decisions. Emily hesitated. "Your Majesty, I am only an Omega from a small village. There are many advisors who understand these matters better than I do." Adrian looked at her calmly. "Many advisors understand numbers. You understand the people behind them." His response left her speechless. No one had ever valued her perspective in that way before. As Emily began reviewing the information, she noticed details that others had missed. She asked questions about families, resources, and the challenges faced by smaller communities. She did not pretend to know everything. She simply listened and offered what she had learned from her own experiences. Adrian watched carefully. He realized Emily did not seek influence. She did not want recognition. She only wanted decisions to reflect reality. That was what made her different. Later, as they walked through the palace gardens, Adrian asked her something he had been wondering for days. "Do you always speak this honestly?" Emily smiled slightly. "Only when I believe something needs to be said." "Even when you are afraid?" he asked. She paused before answering. "Being afraid does not mean you should stay silent." Those words stayed with him. The Alpha King had faced countless challenges throughout his reign, but Emily showed him a kind of courage that did not come from power or position. Came from conviction. As their conversations continued, Adrian discovered more about the Omega behind the unexpected accusation. He learned about her dreams, her struggles, and the years she spent believing she had to prove her worth. He began to understand that Emily had never needed a crown to make a difference. She had already been changing lives long before anyone noticed her. And while the kingdom watched the unusual connection between the Alpha King and the Omega grow, neither of them realized that an even greater secret was waiting to be revealed. A secret that would explain why their paths had crossed at the exact moment they did. The connection between Emily Hayes and Adrian Whitmore continued to grow, but neither of them realized how much their lives were beginning to change. What started as a simple moment of honesty in a royal hall had become something far more meaningful. The Alpha King, who had spent years surrounded by people who carefully chose every word around him, found himself looking forward to conversations with an Omega who never tried to impress him. Emily treated him with respect, but she never forgot that behind the crown was a person who wanted to understand his kingdom better. However, as their connection became more noticeable, questions began spreading throughout the royal court. Many advisors wondered why Adrian continued seeking Emily's perspective. They believed an Omega from a small village could not possibly understand the responsibilities of the crown. They saw her as an unexpected interruption to the traditions they had protected for generations. Emily heard those whispers, and for the first time since arriving at the palace, she questioned whether she truly belonged there. She had never wanted power. She had never wanted attention. She only wanted to help people who were often forgotten. One evening, she quietly told Adrian that perhaps she should return to her village. "Your Majesty, I do not want my presence to create difficulties for you," she said. Adrian looked surprised. "You believe leaving would make things easier?" Emily lowered her eyes. "I believe your kingdom has expectations, and I do not want to become the reason people lose trust in you." For a moment Adrian was silent. Then he spoke with a calm certainty she had never heard before. "Emily, the people who question you are not questioning your worth. They are questioning whether they are ready to accept something different." His words made her pause. Adrian continued, "You did not enter my life because you wanted a place beside the throne. You entered it because you were brave enough to tell me the truth." Emily looked away, unsure how to respond. She was not used to someone recognizing her intentions so clearly. Meanwhile, Adrian began searching through the royal archives for answers about the unusual connection he felt toward Emily. During his research, he discovered references to an ancient agreement between the royal Leakin family and a forgotten Omega bloodline. The records were incomplete, but they suggested that the two paths had crossed before in history during moments when the kingdom needed balance and understanding. When Adrian shared the discovery with Emily, she was confused. "Are you saying this was meant to happen?" she asked. Adrian considered the question carefully. "I do not know if destiny brought you here, but I know your choices are the reason I respect you." That answer meant more to Emily than any ancient prophecy. She did not want to be valued because of a hidden connection or an old legend. She wanted to be seen for who she was. As they continued studying the forgotten records, they discovered more signs that Emily's family carried a history no one had remembered. But the more they learned, the more important one truth became clear. Emily had not changed because of her past. Her past was only beginning to reveal what had always been inside her. The kindness she showed, the courage she carried, the honesty that had challenged the Alpha King. Those qualities were hers alone. And while the kingdom searched for answers about the mystery surrounding the Omega and the crown, Adrian had already discovered the most important truth. The person who changed his view of leadership was not powerful because of where she came from. She was powerful because of who she chose to be. The discovery inside the royal archives changed the way Emily Hayes and Adrian Whitmore viewed their connection. What had once seemed like a simple meeting between an Omega from a small village and an Alpha King was slowly becoming something much deeper. But even with the growing understanding between them, the truth hidden in the ancient records brought new questions that neither of them could ignore. Emily looked at the old documents with uncertainty. She had never expected her family history to become connected to the royal bloodline. For most of her life, she believed she was ordinary. She believed her role was simply to help others quietly and remain away from the attention of powerful people. Now she found herself standing in the center of a mystery that reached back generations. "I do not understand why this matters so much," Emily admitted. "I am still the same person I was before these records were found." Adrian looked at her carefully. "That is exactly why it matters. Nothing about who you are changed because of this discovery." His answer reminded her of something important. The records did not create her value. They only revealed a history that had always existed. The kindness she showed, the courage she carried, and the honesty that brought her into the palace were qualities she had built herself. Meanwhile, the royal court continued. Watching the situation closely, some advisors believed the ancient connection was proof that Emily had a place near the crown. Others remained doubtful, believing that old records should not change centuries of tradition. Adrian understood their concerns, But he also understood something they had not yet accepted. A kingdom could not grow if it refused to see beyond old expectations. During a council meeting, several leaders questioned whether Emily's presence would create uncertainty among the territories. They believed the people needed a clear image of strength from their ruler. Adrian listened quietly before responding. Strength is not pretending we have all the answers. Strength is having the courage to listen when someone shows us what we cannot see. The room became silent. Those words reflected the change that had happened within him. Before meeting Emily, Adrian believed leadership meant carrying every responsibility alone. He believed a king had to appear impossible to challenge. But Emily showed him that accepting another person's perspective did not weaken authority, strengthened it. Later that day, Adrian found Emily in the palace garden. She was watching the first flowers of the season appear after the long winter. "You changed the way I see this kingdom," Adrian said. Emily smiled softly. "I only told you what I saw. And most people never do that," he replied. Their conversation was interrupted by a messenger carrying another piece of information from the archives. The forgotten records revealed that Emily's family had once been connected to a tradition that focused on balance between different groups within the kingdom. The details were still unclear, but one message appeared repeatedly throughout the old writings. True leadership required both wisdom and compassion. Emily wondered if this discovery meant her future had already been decided. Adrian answered before she could say more. "Your future is not written only by history. It is shaped by the choices you make." Those words gave her comfort because they meant she was not simply a part of an old prophecy. She was still Emily, the Omega who spoke the truth, the woman who helped others, without expecting anything in return. And as the kingdom slowly began accepting the changes around them, Adrian realized something that surprised even him. The person who challenged his crown had become the person who helped him understand it. The days following the discovery of the ancient records brought a quiet transformation throughout the leaking kingdom. While some people still struggled to accept the changes happening around them, many began seeing Emily Hayes in a different way. She was no longer simply the Omega from a small village who had spoken unexpectedly in front of the Alpha King. She had become someone whose honesty had reminded the kingdom of a truth it had forgotten. A person's value was not determined by their title. It was revealed through their choices. Emily noticed the difference when she walked through the palace. The same halls that once felt unfamiliar slowly became places where people greeted her with respect. Servants who had once avoided conversation now asked for her advice. Advisors who once questioned her presence began listening to her ideas. She did not expect this change and she never asked for it. But she understood that trust was something built slowly, one moment at a time. Adrian Whitmore watched this change with quiet pride. As the Alpha King, he had always been responsible for protecting his kingdom. But Emily showed him that protection was not only about making decisions from a throne. It was also about understanding the lives of the people those decisions affected. One afternoon, Adrian invited Emily to join him during a visit to several communities near the capital. He wanted her to see how much influence her words had created. Emily was surprised. "I only pointed out what people were experiencing," she said. Adrian smiled. "Sometimes the most important things are the ones everyone else chooses not to notice." During the journey, Emily saw the kingdom from a new perspective. She saw families who were hopeful about the future. She saw communities that wanted to be heard. She realized that the changes happening around her were not because she was special because of an old record. They happened because people were finally willing to listen. However, not everyone welcomed the new direction. Some members of the royal court still believed the traditions of the past should remain untouched. They worried that Adrian's decisions were changing the balance of the kingdom too quickly. When Emily learned about their concerns, she felt responsible. "Maybe I should step away," she told Adrian. "Perhaps things would become easier if I was no longer part of this." Adrian looked at her with surprise. "You still believe your presence is the problem?" Emily was quiet. "I do not want people to lose faith in you because of me." Adrian shook his head. "Emily, they are not questioning you. They are questioning a world they no longer understand." His words reached her deeply. She had spent so much of her life believing she needed to stay unnoticed to avoid causing problems. But Adrian reminded her that disappearing was not always the answer. Sometimes change required someone brave enough to remain. That evening, Adrian and Emily stood together in the palace garden, watching the lights of the kingdom below. "Do you regret speaking to me that day?" Adrian asked. Emily smiled slightly. "I was terrified. But do you regret it?" She thought for a moment. "No, because someone needed to tell the truth." Adrian looked at her and realized that was the reason he respected her so much. Emily never searched for power. She never wanted influence. She simply believed that people deserved honesty. And as the kingdom prepared for a new chapter, Adrian understood that the Omega who once challenged his decision had become the person he trusted most. But hidden within the remaining ancient records was one final secret, a truth that would soon reveal why their paths had crossed and why destiny had brought them together. The final secret hidden within the ancient records was discovered on a quiet morning inside the royal library. For years the documents had remained untouched, their meaning lost beneath layers of forgotten history. But as Emily Hayes and Adrian Whitmore studied the remaining pages together, they finally uncovered the truth behind the connection between the Omega bloodline and the Leakin crown. The records did not speak of power or control. They spoke of balance. They described a time long ago when the kingdom faced uncertainty, and the greatest strength came from cooperation between different groups. The Omega family mentioned in the writings had not been chosen because of status. They had been remembered because they carried a tradition of compassion, wisdom, and understanding. Emily read the words carefully, feeling a strange mixture of surprise and acceptance. "So this was the reason our paths crossed?" she asked. Adrian looked at the pages before answering. "Maybe, but I believe something matters more than destiny." Emily looked at him. "What is that?" "Choice." His answer was simple. "History may explain how we met, but it does not explain why you chose to help me. That was your decision." Those words meant more to Emily than any ancient prophecy. She had spent so much of her life wondering if she was important enough to matter. She had been told that Omegas should stay quiet, follow expectations, and avoid standing in the way of those with greater influence. But now she understood that her value had never depended on how others saw her. It had always been there. Adrian also found himself reflecting on his own journey. Before Emily entered his life, he believed being an alpha king meant always having the final answer. He believed leadership required distance and certainty. But Emily had shown him that listening was not a weakness. Understanding was not a loss of authority. A ruler who truly cared about his people had to be willing to learn from them. Together, Emily and Adrian presented the discoveries to the royal council. They did not ask the kingdom to abandon its traditions. They asked them to remember the purpose behind those traditions. They reminded everyone that history should guide the future, not prevent it. Many who once doubted Emily began seeing her differently. They no longer saw her as an Omega who had stepped beyond her place. They saw her as someone who had helped the kingdom remember what truly mattered. Later that evening, Emily stood beside Adrian in the palace garden. The same place where they had once questioned what the future would bring now felt peaceful. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I had stayed silent that day?" Emily asked. Adrian smiled. "The kingdom would still have a king, but it would not have the same king." She looked at him quietly. "You really believe I changed you?" "I believe you reminded me of something I already knew but had forgotten." The answer touched her heart. Their journey had never been about an Omega proving she deserved a place beside an Alpha King. It had always been about two people learning from each other. One taught the other that kindness could be a form of courage. The other showed that power could be guided by compassion. As the kingdom entered a new era, the bond between Emily and Adrian became a symbol of hope. Not because of an ancient record, not because of a title, but because one person chose to speak the truth, and another person had the wisdom to listen. Yet as they looked toward the future, they both knew the greatest chapter of their story was still waiting to be written. The kingdom had changed in ways no one could have imagined when Emily Hayes first stepped into the royal hall and spoke words that challenged the Alpha King. What began as a moment of unexpected honesty became the beginning of a new understanding between the crown and the people. Months later, the halls of the palace no longer felt distant to Emily. They were no longer symbols of a world where she did not belong. They had become places where her voice was welcomed, where her ideas were valued, and where she could see the difference that compassion created. Adrian Whitmore stood beside her, not because of an ancient record or a forgotten tradition, but because he respected the person she had always been. Emily never became important because she gained the attention of a king. She became important because she never stopped being herself. She continued listening to villagers, supporting communities, and reminding everyone that even the quietest voices could carry great meaning. Adrian often watched her speak with people throughout the kingdom, and he realized that the quality he admired most was not her courage in the royal hall. It was the kindness she showed when no one expected recognition. The Alpha King had once believed that carrying a crown meant carrying every burden alone. But Emily taught him another truth. A leader did not become weaker by accepting help. A leader became stronger by understanding the people they served. Together, they created a future where decisions were not made only from the highest rooms of the palace. They were shaped by conversations with the people who lived throughout the kingdom. The changes were not immediate, and they were not always easy. But each small step proved that a different kind of leadership was possible. One evening, as the sun disappeared behind the mountains surrounding the capital, Emily and Adrian returned to the place where their story had truly begun. The royal hall was quiet, just as it had been on the day she spoke without fear. Emily looked around and smiled. "I still cannot believe I said those words to you." Adrian smiled back. "Neither can I." She laughed softly. "I thought I had made the biggest mistake of my life." "You made the greatest difference of mine," he replied. Emily looked at him, remembering the person he had been when they first met. A powerful ruler surrounded by people who feared disappointing him. Now she saw someone different. Someone who listened. Someone who understood that true strength was not about making others lower their voices. It was about creating a world where everyone had the chance to be heard. Their story became a reminder throughout the kingdom that destiny was not simply something written in old records. It was something created through choices, kindness, and courage. An Omega who believed the truth mattered more than fear had changed the heart of an Alpha King. And an Alpha King who was willing to listen had shown an entire kingdom what real leadership looked like. In the end, Emily was never remembered because she stood beside a crown. She was remembered because she reminded the person wearing it that every voice had value. And Adrian was never remembered only as the strongest ruler in the kingdom. He was remembered as the king who learned that the greatest power was the ability to understand, protect, and love with a gentle heart.